the best fur district. While we were at supper, a perfect roar of gunshots ran around the bay, and on our rushing to the door, we saw the inspector's big canoe coming. Excuse me. Up went the flag, and more gunshots followed. Then we went down to the landing to meet Inspecting Chief Factor Bell. After supper, the newcomer and the factor and I sat before a fire and discussed the fur trade. I liked to listen to the old trader, but the inspector, being the greater traveler of the two, covering every year on the rounds of his regular work thousands upon thousands of miles, was the more interesting talker. Presently, when the subject turned to the distribution of the fur-bearing animals, Mr. Bell took a case from his bag and, opening it, spread out before us upon the factor's desk. It was a map of the Dominion of Canada, on which the name of the principal posts of the Hudson Bay Company were printed in red. Across it, many irregular lines were drawn in different colored inks, and upon its margins were many written notes. "This map, as you see," remarked the inspector, "defines the approximately the distribution of the fur-bearing animals of Canada, and I'll wager that you have never seen another like it. For if it were not for the records of the Hudson Bay Company, no such map would have been compiled. How did I manage it? Well, to begin with, you must understand that the Indians invariably trade their winter's catch of fur at the trading post nearest their hunting grounds. So when the annual returns of all the posts are sent into the company's headquarters, those returns accurately define the distribution of the fur-bearing animals for the year. These irregular lines across the map were drawn after the examination of the annual returns for all the posts for the last 40 years. Publish it? No, sirree, that would not do." But the inspector's remarks did not end the subject. As we began discussing the great breeding grounds of the various fur bearers, and Mr. Bell presently continued, "The greatest center for colored foxes is near Salt River, which flows into Slate River at Fort Smith. There, too, most of the black foxes and silver foxes are trapped. The great otter and fisher centers is around Trout Lake, Island Lake, Sandy Lake, and God's Lake. Otter taken north of Lake Superior are found to be fully one-third larger than those killed in any other region. Black bear and brown bear are most frequently to be met with between Fort Pelly and Portage la Lock. Chamberlain House is the center of the greatest breeding ground for muskrat, mink, and ermine. Minnetonka House is another great district for muskrat. Lynx are found in great number in the Iroquois Valley. In the foothills on the east side of the Rockies, coyote skins come chiefly from the district between Calgary and Qu'Appelle, for 100 miles both north and south. Skunks are most plentiful just south of Green Lake. Formerly, they lived on the plains, but of late they have moved north into the woods. Wolverine frequent most the timber country just south of the Barren Grounds, where they are often found traveling in bands. The home of the porcupine lies just north of Isle et la Crosse. 40 years ago, the breeding grounds of the beaver were on the eastern side of the Rockies. Nowadays, that region is hardly worth considering as a trapping ground for them. They have been steadily migrating eastward along the Churchill River, then by way of Cross Lake, Fort Hope, and Abitibi, thence northeasterly clean across the country to Labrador, where few were to be found 25 years ago. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying the beaver were not found in those parts years ago, but what I mean is that the source of the greatest harvest of beaver skins has moved steadily eastward during the last 40 years. Strange to say, the finest marten skins secured in Canada are not those of extreme northern limit, but those taken on the Parsnip River in British Columbia. Wanted, a son-in-law. Next morning, I busied myself making a few additions to my outfit for the winter. Then I borrowed a 2.5 fathom canoe and paddled across the lake to Spearhead, the town I had heard so much about from the free trader. Was just a little clearing of about 3 acres on the edge of the forest. In fact, it was really just a stump log with a small 1.5 story log house standing in the middle. Where there was a rise in the field, a small log stable was set half underground, and upon its roof was stacked the winter's supply of hay for a team of horses, a cow, and a heifer. After the front door, at the front door, Mr. and Miss Spears welcomed me. My hostess was a prepossessing Canadian woman of fair education. In fact, she had been a stenographer. On entering the house, I found the trading room on the right of a tiny hall. On the left was a living room, which was also used to eat in, and the kitchen was, of course, in the rear. After being entertained for 10 or 15 minutes by my host and hostess, I heard light footsteps descending the stairs, and the next moment I beheld a charming girl. She was their only child. They called her Athabasca, after the beautiful lake of that name. She was 16 years of age, tall, slender, and graceful, a brunette with large, soft eyes and long, flowing, wavy hair. She wore a simple little print dress that was becomingly short in the skirt, a pair of black stockings, and low, beaded moccasins. I admired her appearance, but regretted her shyness, for she was almost as bashful as I was. She bowed and blushed. So did I. And while her parents talked to me, she sat demurely silent on the sofa. Occasionally, I caught from her, with pleasant embarrassment, a shy but fleeting glance. Presently, dinner was announced by a half-breed maid, and we four took our places at the table, Athabasca opposite me. At first the talk was lively, though only 3 shared in it. Then, as the third seemed rather more interested in his silent partner, he would from time to time lose the thread of the discourse. By degrees, the conversation died down into silence. A few minutes later, Miss Spears suddenly remarked, "Father, Don't you think it would be a good thing if you took son-in-law into partnership? Father leaned back, stretched his head for a scratched his head for a while, and then replied, "Yes, mother, I do, and I'll do it." The silent though beautiful Athabasca, without even raising her eyes from her plate, blushed violently, and needless to say I blushed too, but of course only out of sympathy. The horses are too busy just now to haul the logs, but of course the young people could have our spare room until I could build them a log shack. Father, that's a capital idea, so there's no occasion for any delay whatever. Then, when the house is finished, we could spare them a bed, a table, a couple of chairs, and give them new cooking stove. Athabasca blushed deeper even than ever, and studied her plate all the harder, and I began to show interest and picked up my ears, for I wondered who on earth son-in-law could be. I knew perfectly well there was no young white man in all the region, and that even if he lived in the nearest frontier town, it would take him either by canoe or snowshoes at least 2 weeks to make the round trip to Spearhead just to call on her. I couldn't fathom it at all. Besides, mother, we might give them the heifer as a starter, for she will be ready to milk in the spring. Then, too, we might give them a few ducks and geese and perhaps a pig. Excellent idea, father. Besides, I think I could spare enough cutlery, dishes, and cooking utensils to help out for a while. And I could lend them some blankets from the store, the trader returned. But at that moment, Athabasca miscalculated the distance to her mouth and dropped a bit of potato on the floor, and when she stooped to recover it, I caught a glance from the corner of her eye. It was one of those indescribable glances that girls give. I remember it made me perspire all over. Queer, isn't it? The way women sometimes affect one. I would have blushed more deeply, but by the time there was no possible chance of my face becoming any redder, notwithstanding the fact that I was a redhead. Ponder as I would, I couldn't fathom the mystery. Who his son-in-law could be, though I had already begun to think him a lucky fellow, quite one to be envied. Then Miss Peer exclaimed, as we rose from the table, "Good! Then that's settled. You'll take him into partnership, and I'm glad, for I like him and I think he'll make an excellent trader." Our greeting, our getting away from the table rather relieved me, as I was dripping perspiration, and I wanted to fairly mop my face, of course, when they weren't looking. Together they showed me over the establishment, the spare bedroom, the trading shop, the stable, the heifer, the ducks and geese, and even the pig, though it puzzled me why they singled out the very one they intended to give son-in-law. The silent thought beautiful the silent though beautiful Athabasca followed a few feet behind as we went the rounds, and inspected the wealth that was to be bestowed upon her lover. I was growing more inquisitive than ever as to who son-in-law might be. Indeed, I felt like asking, but was really too shy, and besides, when I thought it over, I concluded it was none of my business. When the time came for me to return to the Hudson Bay Post, I shook hands with them all. Athabasca had a nice hand and a good grip, too. Her parents gave me a pressing invitation to visit them again for a few days at New Year's, when everyone in the country would be going to the great winter festival that was always held for Consolation. As I paddled away, I mused, by George, son-in-law is certainly a lucky dog, for Athabasca is a peach, but I don't see how in thunder her lover ever gets a chance to call. Leaving for Consolation. I was up early next morning, and as I wished to see how Ukahu and his party would pack up and board their canoes, I walked around the bay to the Indian village. After a husky breakfast, the women pulled down the lodge coverings and sheets of birch bark and rolled them up, placing them upon the starchigan, the stage, along with other things which they intended to leave behind. The lodge poles were left standing in readiness for their return next summer, and it wasn't long before all their worldly goods, save their skin teepees and most of their traps, which had been left on their last winter's hunting grounds, were placed aboard the three canoes, and off they paddled to the post to say good-bye, while Amick assured his advances. Just think of it. All your housekeepers, no gold plate or silver to send to the vault, no bric-a-brac to pack, no furniture to cover, no bedding to put away, no rugs or fur or clothes to send to cold storage, no servant to wrangle with or discharge, no plumbers no to swear over, no janitors to curse at, no, not even any housekeepers to do, no, not even any house cleaning to do before departing. Just move and nothing more. Just dump a little outfit into a canoe and paddle away from all your tiresome environment and travel wherever your heart dictates, and then settle down where not even an exasperating neighbor could find you. What would you give to live such a peaceful life? As I understand it, says Thoreau, that was a valid objection urged by Momus against the house which Minerva made, that she had not made it movable, by which means a bad neighbor might be avoided, and it may still be urged, for our houses are such unwieldy property that we are often imprisoned rather than housed in them, and the bad neighbors to be avoided is our own scabby selves. On their arrival, Amick at once set about getting his advances. He was a stalwart, athletic-looking man of about 35, and not the equal of his father-in-law in character. Ukahu now told the factor just where he intended to hunt, what furs he expected to get, and how the fur runners could best find his camp. As the price of fur had risen, the factor told him what price he would expect to pay. If, however, the price had dropped, the factor would not have informed the hunter until his return next year. During the course of the conversation, The old hunter begged a loan of a second-hand gun and some traps for the use of his grandsons. The factor granted his request. In the meantime, the women called upon the clergyman and the priest and the nuns to wish them farewell, and incidentally to do a little more begging. As they were not ready to go by noon, the factor's wife spread a cloth upon the kitchen floor and placed upon it some food for the party. After lunch, they actually made ready to depart, and everybody came down to the landing to see us off. As the children and dogs scrambled aboard the canoes, the older woman remembered that she had not been paid for her gift of moccasins, and so another delay took place while the factor selected a suitable present. It is always thus. Then, at last, the canoes pushed off. Amid the waving of hands, the shouting of farewells, and the shedding of a few tears even, the simple natives of the wilderness paddled away over the silent lake en route for their distant hunting grounds. Thither the reader must follow, and there, amid the fastness of the great northern forest, we must spend the winter if we would see the Indian at his best. There is a beggar no longer there, escaped from the civilization which the white man is ever forcing upon the red, a civilization which rarely fails to make a degenerate of him. He proves his manhood. There, contrary to the popular idea, he will be found to be a diligent and skillful worker and an affectionate husband and father. There, given health and game, no toil and no hardship will hinder him from procuring furs enough to pay off his indebtedness and to lay up in stores twice as much gain with which to engage next spring in the delightful battle of wits between the white man and the red in the great company trading room. The next story is chapter 2. The name of it is In Quest of Treasure, the Perfect Fool. Thank you all for coming, for listening, and God bless. Stay safe and stay awesome, because you know each and every one of you is very awesome to me. And hello everybody in the chat. I'm sorry I didn't interact. I was reading. I hope you understand. And I am going to try to get back into reading if you all care to hear the rest of the story. So, you all have a good Labor Day weekend, or weekend's over. Y'all have a great Labor Day, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.